My wife and I had just recently purchased a new house. After an incident that occurred that rendered our previous home unlivable, my wife and I were desperate for a new place to live. With the little money I had left, I fought through the rough until I eventually found us a suitable place to live. It was quaint, cozy, kind of small, but that was all right by us. It was near the local grocery store and some of our favorite restaurants, and it was a nice, quiet suburban neighborhood with seemingly nice neighbors. This was a house that the two of us were willing to buy and be happy about. Everything was going great until we met the seller of the house. I had pictured him as a normal guy, but he seemed far from normal. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, Caucasian, with odd body proportions. His head seemed to be large for his neck, and his arms seemed unnaturally large and bulky compared to the rest of his body. His hair, or at least what was left of it, was messy and it seemed almost charred. His clothes were tattered and dirty, and he had this deranged look in his eyes. He kept talking fast and stuttering with his words and made quick, erratic jolts at random intervals. Me and my wife both agreed this man looked completely insane, and we didn't know what could have been the cause. We were starting to get hesitant to purchase this house, but after giving this place a very thorough inspection, and by thorough, I mean touching the walls and everything to find secret entrances, and we found nothing unusual. This was a perfectly normal living space. It was just the seller of the place that was putting us off. The two of us came to an agreement and we purchased the house. We later cleaned the place up and once again found nothing strange about this place. No secret entrances or items of interest. Everything was normal and we were fine with that. Me and my wife attempted to put the past behind us and start moving in some old furniture into the new place. It took a while, but everything was finally set up. It was really starting to feel like home again, and the two of us were content with this. It wasn't until a few days later that things got out of hand. Our new house had a small, fenced-in backyard with a tall oak tree in the northwest corner. My wife had gone out one day to examine the area and found a small red flag behind the tree. When she went to inspect the flag, she noticed it was positioned atop some grass and weeds that seemed out of place, like they were pulled from the ground and placed over the actual ground. She called me over to help inspect, and when I got over there, I picked up the patch of grass and found a hole underneath it, with a ladder leading down into it. Me and my wife looked at each other. We both had that sense of fear and confusion in our eyes, but most of all, overwhelming curiosity. I went down the ladder and into the hole, with my wife not far behind, and when I reached the bottom, what I saw made me nearly scream. As my wife followed behind, she nearly screamed along with me. This was something far worse than we could have ever expected. It was a large, seemingly hand-dug tunnel, almost the size of a subway station, and hanging on each of the tunnel walls were hundreds and hundreds of human bones. Me and my wife gazed in awe at what we were seeing. I swear I felt like I was gonna faint at that moment. As the two of us gradually developed the courage to continue down the tunnel, it just kept getting worse. There was dry blood scattered on the walls and floors at various intervals, and the occasional piece of severed intestine could be found pulsating on the floor. The scent alone would have been enough to make me vomit, but my attention was quickly diverted when I heard the sound of a faint, pained scream. It sounded vaguely human, but it was too far away to be sure. At this point, we had gone too far in and there was no turning back now. So me and my wife, we reluctantly continued down the cave. As we went further in, there was more blood and intestines spattered about, and the screams kept getting louder and more clear. My heart was racing, and my mind was racing. I couldn't go on any longer, but I needed to know what sat at the bottom of this tunnel. With more hesitation, my wife and I continued down the tunnel until we finally reached the end. Before then, we didn't know what to expect to be at the end of this tunnel. But nothing we could have ever possibly imagined could have been worse than what we actually saw. Sitting there in a deformed chair was a human male, at least what might have once been a human male. His hands were tied behind his back and he had a dirty gray blindfold over his eyes. There were gashes and large incisions throughout his body, blood seeping and intestines hanging loosely from the open wound, with sewing marks near the connection points of many of his limbs. He had a multitude of arms and legs, sewn to his chest, shoulders, arms, and back, thrashing and thriving about. The man was covered in blood and various other unknown fluids, and he was screaming in absolute agony. It was the kind of scream that made your skin crawl just by hearing it. The man thrashed about and fell out of his chair and onto the hard stone floor, where he lay there on the floor, blindfolded, fallen apart, squirming and chewing on what might have been his own liver. My wife and I stood there in horror, not a sound escaping from our bodies, as the man continued to thrash about on the floor. We even stood there in shock as one of his eyes popped out of its socket, blood trickling from the eye socket. I started to back away slowly as my hand grazed up against a wall and I felt what might have been a button. Out of pure instinct, I pressed the button and I turned around to see my suspicions were true, but I turned my eyes back to the man. Something horrifying was moments away from taking place. The whole place began to shake violently, and everything began to crumble around us. Suddenly, everything came to a halt, and a huge rock fell from a large hole in the ceiling. The rock fell at an intense speed and landed with a harsh, ground-shaking thud, crushing the poor man's body and leaving only a head left. Even after the man's clear demise, I swear I could still see the man's pupils race around and make quick darting glances. My wife and I couldn't take it anymore. We fled the scene and climbed up out of the tunnel. We immediately called the police to investigate the area, and they were on the scene immediately. I cannot disclose the information I was told about the man or his heinous acts within the tunnel, as the investigation is still underway, but I can say this. That man, that lunatic of a man that sold us this place was not merely some deranged goon. He was an absolute lunatic, hell-bent on pushing humans to their limit through his horrific experimentations. He was a truly deranged man that needed to be locked away forever for his heinous crimes against humanity. My wife and I are currently attempting to sell the house, as both of us agree that we cannot stay near that place any longer. Currently, we've had no buyers, but we're hoping soon we can move far away from that forsaken place and move to somewhere better. You know, I would have really liked that place if it wasn't for the horrors that I had seen. I should have never trusted that man in the first place. I can still hear the pain screams of that poor victim in the tunnel in my head, of the squirming limbs jetting from the rest of his body, and of the sound of that large boulder crushing the poor man's body to a pulp. It was deplorable. I just hope that that man is in a better place now.